Hi, I'm Miss Vidali, and I'm here to talk to you about Chapter 3 today of To Kill a Mockingbird. Chapter 3 is an interesting one. It's pretty exciting because it starts with Scout, and she is going out to the schoolyard during the lunchtime, and she wants to beat up Walter Cunningham. He is the one, in her opinion, that got her in trouble with the teacher and made her stand in the corner because he kept asking her to go on and tell Miss Caroline about the Yules and about Burris and why he doesn't have any lunch or why he doesn't have any money for lunch. And so every time she would try to tell the teacher, Miss Caroline, took it as she was being disruptive or rude, and that got her in trouble. So she blames it all on Walter Cunningham, and she's excited to go out into the schoolyard to find him, and she starts rubbing his nose in the dirt. She's going to beat him up, and Jim says to stop it. Leave Walter alone. And she says, why? And he said, because you're bigger than him, and that's not very nice. But what we learn later is that it's not because she's bigger than him, it's because she has more than him. See, Walter comes from a very poor farm family, and in the Great Depression, that is the worst place to be because these people had a lot of pride, and they didn't have anything, they didn't have any money, and all they could do is try to live off their land. And so Walter is clearly very poor, and Jim knows it's wrong that Scout is being a bully and beating him up, and it's only because she doesn't understand. She thinks that Walter got her in trouble, but really it was the teacher's ignorance that got her in trouble. And she was really just trying to do the right thing by helping explain the Yules in Burris' situation, and also by helping Walter Cunningham by doing what he asked. So anyway, the conversation goes on, and Jim says, our daddy's a friend of your daddy's. Is your dad Walter Cunningham from Old Sarum? And they find out that Atticus actually was the lawyer for his dad at one time. And so they get to walk in and talk in, and Jim invites him over for dinner, which is really lunch. They just have dinner in the middle of the day. So they walk on home, they walk by the Radleys' scary house and talk about it and how they're not scared, even though they're trying to convince each other. And he says, a haint lives there, Walter says. And so Jim boasts about going up and touching the house that one time, and then they get to the house for lunch. And so when they get in the house, Walter is very polite, and he talks to Atticus, and he tells Atticus, a bunch of stuff, and they have some conversation about his dad, and they talk like two gentlemen doing business, because Walter comes from a farm family, so he knows a lot of stuff about business. But anyway, then he goes on to put some molasses on his vegetables, and Scout freaks out, and she says, what are you doing, Walter? Why would you put that on your, vegetables? That's really weird, basically. And Calpurnia summons her into the kitchen and tells her that behavior is not acceptable because he's their company. And when you have company, no matter who they are, you treat them with respect. So then Scout goes on to talk about Atticus and Calpurnia's education and how both of them combined have more education than almost all the colored folks in the area. And then they argue a little bit more about Walter and the family he comes from. And she's like, he's just a Cunningham. And Cal says, I don't care who he is. You treat him with respect. And so she makes her sit in the kitchen and eat her dinner by herself until she can act, better towards her company. And then we learn a little bit more about Cal's role. And she's not just the cook. She really is the mother figure. And Atticus has a lot of respect for her. And he, trusts her to discipline his children because it's clear that they have a lot of the same morals and everything. And then it jumps to school, and they're back in class right after lunch, and Miss Caroline is taking roll call, and she gets to Burris Yule, and she basically says, I have a Yule on my roster, but no first name. And she said, what is your first name? To the young man who did not have any lunch money. And the boy blinked, and he said, Burris Yule. And so she says, I don't have a Burris. And so they're arguing about the roster. And basically what happens is the Yules just come to the first day of school, so that way their name gets on the roster and they don't get in trouble by the state. And then they don't show up again because they are a poor family and they are considered white trash and kind of like the nuisance of the town. And so he starts back talking Miss Caroline, and he calls her a bunch of names. And he basically says, he's not sticking around. And she said, Burris, can you wash the bugs out of your hair for tomorrow with some lye soap? And he says, I don't plan on coming back. And so he then calls her some names, and he is very contentious with her, and he calls her a couple names and runs out the door. And so a couple of the children come to her, and little Chuck Little, he's like, don't worry, ma'am, you're doing just fine. Read us a new story. And he tries to distract her because it just really shows the kindness of some of the kids, even though that there are some mean kids. Kind of just goes to show you how society is, right? There's always kind people and there's always rude people, and that's how the class kind of ends. And then Scout goes back home and she talks to her dad Atticus, and she complains about Miss Caroline not liking that she can read and how she hates school and she wants to quit. And she also said, Atticus, you didn't go to school, so why do I have to? And he says, you have to go to school. I have to make a living and you have to go to school. And so he said, if you learn a simple trick, Scout, you'll get along a lot better with everybody. He says a very famous quote, and it is, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. And that's one of the most famous quotes of the book, right? It's teaching Scout empathy. And so he's trying to show her that if you would just look at things from other people's perspectives, from Miss Caroline, from Burris, from Yule, from Jim, you would have a better understanding. And so he basically makes a promise to her that they will keep reading together as long as she doesn't tell Miss Caroline, because he does not want to get in trouble with Miss Caroline. And he also tells her that he didn't go to school, but he has a feeling that Miss Caroline will come after him if they keep reading together. And they both wouldn't want him after her. So if Scout wants to go to school and have a good time, she needs to kind of stay low a little bit, lay low from Miss Caroline. So that's all.